now. So welcome to tonight's webinar presentation by the Historical Society of Santa Rosa. We are simultaneously broadcasting live on both Facebook and on Zoom. So those that registered free of charge to join us on Zoom, thank you and welcome to tonight's presentation. Those of you that are joining us on Facebook, you can come and go as you like on that live simulcast. If you would like to ask questions, we will not be seeing our participants on screen this evening other than our presenter and myself, but questions can be asked by either keying them into the chat room on Zoom or keying them into the comment section on Facebook. Those questions will be held in the parking lot until after the presentation is over. And I will be facilitating those questions with our presenter after our presentation. Our presentation this evening has both a PowerPoint and a video, so be sure to stay for both of those. And this evening's presentation is going to be presented by none other than Leasa Graves, who, as again, my name is Leslie Graves. We're of no relation, but we've met each other years ago and had a good chuckle over that. And not to get confused here, there's two L's and there's two Graves, but we're going to do okay. So Leasa, welcome. Thanks for coming in this evening. I have a quick introduction about you. For our participants, Leasa Graves is the former Director of Education for the National Women's History Alliance, and she will address the organization's beginnings and the importance of Women's History Month. Happy Women's History Month, by the way. As a local educator, Leasa will be teaching a class at Santa Rosa Junior College through the Lifelong Learning Department, where students of all ages will be guided through researching history. So thank you, Leasa, once again for being here. I am going to go off screen at this time and leave the presentation to you. And remember, folks, to stick with us throughout the whole presentation. We'll reserve our last 20 to 30 minutes before 7:30 for a Q&A. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for having me, Leslie, and for the wonderful introduction. I'm excited to get to be here to talk about the National Women's History Project, which is now known as the National Women's History Alliance. If anyone's interested after my webinar, I will be teaching a course on doing local history. I know many historians are here, but I'm excited to have this opportunity through the JC, through the lifelong learning, and I'd love to see people there. And hope that class gets launched. If it's not launched in summer, it'll be launched in fall. All right, so let's get started. All right. So what you see on this first slide is the first celebration, a Women's History Parade. So it's one of, so I'm here really on behalf of the National Women's History Alliance and also Molly McGregor, who's still very much active in the National Women's History Alliance, although she has officially retired this year in the capacity of director, and there is a new director leading the charge there. She's still very much, if you call, she will pick up the phone, and I think that this is her lifelong passion, and she will be fighting for women's history for the rest of the time that she's with us. So let's see. So this next slide, sorry, Leslie, I don't have a quick, good way to change that one. So this slogan, Write Women Back into History, has been the National Women's History Alliance presentation slogan for since its inception. It continues to be used today, and it sums up who the organization is and what they strive to do. The birth of the women's history movement was in Sonoma County in 1978. By 1980, it was a nonprofit for, and originally again known as the National Women's History Project, and then was created to spearhead the movement. The original creation was to make it so that the president and Congress would issue a proclamation declaring March a National Women's History Month. So up to that moment. This idea came from Molly and some other local leaders. She had been teaching, and she was teaching history. And some kids had some questions about women's history, and she thought, I don't actually know the answer to that. And so they went in and looked at, got some books out of the library and looked for books that mentioned women. And it turned out that the books that they had access to on history included any mention of women. And when they did, they were usually ancillary, kind of like somebody's wife, somebody's helper, but not actually as a primary role in being a real change maker. And so this prompted them. We'll go to the next slide. She says you joined together with some other local women on how to the Commission on the Status of Women, and came with this idea of let's do women's history. Let's get Women's History Month going, and Molly was able to present that idea nationally to the National Women's Commission. And at that commission, they were thrilled. And so from that time, they then moved forward to have the proclamation signed. So at this time, very few teachers and even few students could name 3 women who had made major contributions to women's history. And so that became the idea of getting as many stories out there as possible. For Molly says that women at this time, women's history really seemed to be written in some kind of invisible ink. And so it was on purpose that they wanted to make women's history as visible as possible, because they saw invisibility as the number one form of bias, because it assumes that women or other groups have no history. And so the goal of the organization is to encourage the fact that women have made major contributions since the beginning of human history, and to expand what we know about history and culture, and so that this history is good for all of us, right? It's not just good for girls and women, but it's good for everyone to understand that the contributions that have been made and the people that have shaped our country. Let's see. So once Molly likes to tell the story that she got a phone call from, they had an office at the time, which I'll go into in a little bit, but when it came, they actually got a phone call from the White House. And it's the only time a president has ever called Molly and let her know that Women's History would be declared Women's History Month. And it has been declared Women's History Month every year until this year. Okay. Right, we can slide 5, please. So this is one of the many ways the women's history expanded, right? I know somebody asked the question, like, what kind of concern or pushback might there have been at this time? And Molly always reports it was actually people were pretty excited. There were the occasional people that would question why women's history, why do women need to have a history month? But it was very rare. Most people were excited to embrace this. The teachers were excited to attend conferences that the organization offered, and they wanted to know this information. And so that helped the organization grow from an organization that was going to get this proclamation to an organization that was going to forever change the way that we think about women's history. And it started as a grassroots movement, which I think is so important, right, especially this year, to think about how powerful grassroots movements can be. So it did start with, a big thing was providing materials to schools. As you can see in this photo, marching, getting the word out there, making yourself visible. And then from there, let's see. And it's funny because Molly talks about how to us, because I'm someone who grew up with women's history, that it just is something that happened. But at the time, it was a very revolutionary idea. And it was controversial. And some people thought that they were men haters, wanting to destroy the family. This is a quote from what Molly experienced, and wanted to destroy the notion of just history in general. But for them, they said, no, history is exciting. It's important. It's not boring. It's really about all the way that you teach it and share it, and that it should be inclusive, and that we shouldn't have those invisible people written in invisible ink as if they didn't contribute anything. So this is a picture of a parade. Some of you might recognize downtown Santa Rosa, marching past the library, it looks like, and well attended. And then we can go to the next slide. Okay, and then this is a photo of the Commission on the Status of Women. marching down 4th Street. So it really became about a coalition, right? So there's the National Women's History Group, and they've always continued uh, to be people that call in other groups and try to collaborate with other groups. And again, as big as they've grown over the years, there's still very much a grassroots feel to them because at the core of the project is, it's really just about, again, education and celebration of women's contributions. So they really wanted to encourage people to understand the complex story of American history, and just infuse it with not just women, but like diverse faces and experiences of all types, all groups of women. Um, and so they decided that they really wanted to avoid the regular traditional chronology of how we talk about history. And so they decided to focus on ideas about women that would inspire people. So they came up with this idea of developing curriculum and themes that highlighted attributes of particular groups of women, and that way time, it wasn't going first, last, then next, right? It's going in a way that includes people from all backgrounds and all ages. Um, let's see. Okay, I'm gonna go. So it's always fun to look back at National Women's History because there are some pretty prominent people that pop up that are not always associated with the beginning of this month. And one of them is Lynn Woolsey, who was on the status of women and was very instrumental in helping push this idea of a Women's History Month forward. So we see a picture. And one of the things that as the first Women's History Month came along, because so few people could name a woman that was had a historical achievement, it really became this big, exciting thing to list as many women on one poster as possible to show this visual impact. And I think in hindsight, this act ended up being a very powerful launch to this program and to this idea of celebrating women's history. And the National Women's History Alliance really likes to think of March as the kickoff to reminding us to celebrate women's history, and not the only day or month that we focus, and not the end, but the kickoff to the whole year celebration, that we're celebrating it always. But if we take a moment, I believe, if I'm correct, there's over 100 women on here. And although nowadays we'd probably look at it and graphically think, oh, it's not very eye-catching, it does have the power of noting all of these incredible women. And so it lets you know right away that there are, and then of course, as we know, this is just the tip of the iceberg. So again, a lot of the National Women's History Alliance in the beginning was about community outreach and events. So we have Maria Cuevas, who's still in Sonoma County and still continues to share her beautiful voice and her music with people. And so they were singing a song. So there were, lots of different varieties of grassroots events, including parades and various celebrations. Um, so these are the founders of the National Women's History. So from the left, there's Molly Murphy McGregor, again, still in Sonoma County, still very active, and has been up until this year when she officially retired, she's been the director all the years that the Alliance has been running. There's Paula Hammett, Mary Ruth's daughter, Maria Cuevas, Betty Morgan, and they're in front of our Cottingtown office, which is another interesting connection. So at one point, the National Women's History Alliance was a very large, very successful distributor of national women's history materials. So much so that they had a big office in Cottingtown. But what most people don't know is that Nell Cotting provided that office space and air conditioning for 7 years. And the reason that Molly has included air conditioning on the slide is because at one point they didn't have air conditioning. And I think they were told that there wasn't really anything maintenance could do about it. And they talked to Nell about it. Sorry. And she made sure that it was taken care of. And so for 7 years, so she, again, was the silent person who she doesn't get a lot of recognition for this contribution that she made. And yet she was also instrumental in ensuring that the project got a strong foothold in their mission. And so their first six grants they received from the federal government totaled over $500,000. And these were used for just education purposes and materials for the most part. So educational conferences where educators were invited to learn about women's history. We have to imagine or remember that this is a people were not learning this, had not learned this likely in school. So to be able to teach their students about women's history, they're going to need to get a women's history education themselves. And they're also going to need to get an education on sharing diverse stories and engaging their students in projects and activities that would make history exciting and come to life for them. And this is another poster, and then they have a DVD set. So they, again, creating education materials, trying to get to as many people as they can. So they produce several films, interviews, audio tapes, and a lot of this is now stored at Sonoma State in their archives. And then this is a picture of, so when teachers get to go to these trainings during this time, they're getting grants to go and get these materials. And so here's a picture of one of the teachers who had organized a kind of living history grant. So philosophy very similar to that of like History Day, right? Where it's engaged, we're living the characters, we're getting to know hands-on. It's not just about reading, but it's about accessing the material in a way that connects to students. So then they decided, again, always trying to reach more people. So they're educating teachers, they're producing films that can and information, they're creating classroom curriculum, and then they developed. Well, this is a piece from Miss Magazine. So again, it's interesting how far their reach has been, and so. But you used to be able to go and order the resources off a catalog. So this is before before the Y2K, and that plays into the history of the project, right? So prior to the Y2K's event, they're the best place to go. They're a clearinghouse for materials. They're selling books written by women about women. They're selling, as you can see on here, commemorative posters, stickers, bookmarks, just everything to make it the celebratory feel, make it exciting. And then every year they would choose a different theme, and that theme they would create a poster and marketing materials around that, and then they would nominate women who kind of fit that theme from all over the country and celebrate them during Women's History Month. Okay. And then eventually they would expand. They started noticing that people on Women's Equality Day didn't really either know about Women's Equality Day or didn't feel like there was materials and wanted more opportunities to celebrate and embracing the idea that we should be celebrating women's history all year long. They also began to create materials for Women's Equality Day and the history behind that and helping to promote that event. Okay, and then some of the people, there's Molly up front, down in the bottom. So some of the people that were interviewed by Judith Zinner's Feminism and History. Again, many of Molly for a long time. I think that's why she often recruits me when people are asking for backgrounds and presentations, because she really has dedicated her whole life to women's history, and so she's at a point where she's given a lot of speeches, a lot of talks, a lot of interviews, and she likes to say she likes to pass the baton to the next generation. At one point, the National Women's History Alliance received a special award from the Department of Education for their outstanding training sessions. And when you look at the training materials and the curriculum, I'm blessed to have some of these pieces in my own little tiny National Women's archive. It's really cutting edge. It's really ahead of its time. I would argue that it's revolutionized the way that education was taught, that history in general was taught, not just women's history, because it said, let's stop looking at this in a chronological order. Let's make this engaging. Let's connect kids and people to the history, and invite people to do their own research, their own history, and really just hands-on activities. And so it should come as no surprise that they were nominated for awards for their history programs, because they definitely were very cutting edge and still relevant today. One of the things that Molly's most proud of is how many teachers they've trained. So while they had access to these grants, they were able to train hundreds of teachers throughout the country. And this is a picture of one of the school districts that it was a summer institute that the teachers came together to learn about women's history. And in the background, there's a bunch of I've spent a lot of time with these posters in the back. So those are women's history posters. And then all the materials in here would have been women's history materials as well, just to let you know how thorough they were. Okay. Another approach was to conduct workshops throughout the country, working in every state. And again, it wasn't just about educating children, although that was a big impetus of starting this program, but it was to just educate everybody, to just find the joy in the contributions that women have made, and celebrate them in every field and every area, and help expand our understanding of our country's history. One of the things I know that Molly is also very proud of for the National Women's History Alliance is the production of Adelante Mujeres. And this is one of the films that they worked on. And this is Susan Otterman and Mary Ruth Stoddard working on the production of that. Many of these have been converted into DVD. So if you're interested in accessing these films, I know we don't all use DVD these days, but you can actually visit the website, and some materials have gone out of publishing, but some of the films are still available. And then some of the supporters, Helen Rudy and Marique Bike celebrates women's history at Paradise Ridge Winery. Local people. And then these are just some of the events that over the years have been created in Sonoma County. So again, even if nationally people were questioning why women's history, why would we want to celebrate that? And there was a pushback against the National Women's History Alliance, because there was a pushback against the women's movement simultaneously happening. The efforts in our county, were more inclusive than not, more excited to celebrate than not, donating time, donating money, donating their facilities, and then hosting their own women's history. So that, the women's history started and inspired, but then from that inspiration, people started either taking the theme that the National Women's History Alliance had created that year, or making their own theme, their own celebration, their own honorees. One of the people that's contributed a lot to the National Women's History Alliance is Bob Cooney. He does historical research, and he had really wanted to talk to them about the planning of the 75th anniversary of women in the United States winning the vote. And he produced an educational materials that for women in the vote, that thousands of teachers and librarians, and even in workplaces, right? Every year we sell materials to, well, at least during the years that I worked during the education department, we would sell materials to federal government agencies, to corporations. Just to show you how widespread that women's history just kind of became a part of the fabric of our culture. And then Bob Cooney would actually go on to write a very extensive suffrage book about women's suffrage. Highly recommend. It's a beautiful hardback book with detailed information. And I believe he's working on another book right now. And so they went to DC and celebrated the 75th anniversary of women's suffrage. So here's a picture of that. There's Molly up front. And then the flight crew of the Discovery STS-95 sent a picture of them holding one of the original women's suffrage flags used in the 1913 parade. Which, when I look at it, makes me a little emotional, because it's just how far we had gone, how much we had achieved. We'd even made it to space with our efforts to celebrate women's history. And the reason I brought up Y2K is because for years the Women's History Alliance was actually part of the, again, the largest clearinghouse for you to purchase materials, books, magazines, shirts, cups, all the things that you might want to celebrate your women's history. But unfortunately, and until I met Molly, I didn't even know this was actually something that could happen. The big Y2K movement, we were all afraid of that everything was going to crash and that, the computers weren't going to work anymore. Well, the National Women's History Alliance actually fell victim to that. They had purchased a program that was supposed to do their bookkeeping, and it was one that did not stand the test to Y2K. And it actually created it basically I won't go into the details, but it harmed the organization, and it really depleted them financially as they tried to remedy this financial error that had happened due to the program that they used to figure out how much inventory that they had and how much they needed to buy. And so it's kind of impacted the large scale efforts of the National Women's History Alliance currently, because I feel like they're still continuing to work through this just poor luck that happened with Y2K. But by that point, so many people were celebrating in women's history to become part of our fabric. It didn't ruin anything. It just meant that there was, there wasn't the office at Coddingtown anymore. It became a more smaller scale run organization. Here's a staff member, Susan Ottoman. She is in the International Center and Archive of Women's Movement in Amsterdam, and she was in the archives digging around and found one of the network news for the National Women's History Alliance. So that, again, shows how far the reach of the alliance had come. And then they also mobilized the country to celebrate the 150th anniversary of the women's rights movement. And so again, every time they're advocating for these celebrations, it's coming with educational materials, outreaches, encouragement of celebrations locally. And here is, so for years they've did what kind of like what we think of as a newspaper, and they would actually distribute these to schools, often sometimes for free. You could purchase them. So it was a detailed kind of celebration newspaper type material that would go along with whatever the theme for whatever the celebration. In more recent years, they've moved to more of a magazine style for with the same intent. And here's a picture of the National Women's History Project. They received the prestigious National Education Association Award. We have Molly and the other important members in the National Women's History Project. And then here's them again at Washington, D.C. For many years, there would be celebrations at D.C. For many years, the dinner and awards ceremony for the women that were nominated for that year's theme would be in attendance at Washington, D.C. Here's some more members. And then when I came along, I was in grad school. I was studying history. I had received my history degree from Sonoma State. And at this time, I was getting my history degree from Arizona State University. And I was looking for places to volunteer. And I can't honestly tell you how I stumbled across the National Women's History Alliance, but you can imagine my surprise when I found out that an organization that had started the Women's History Month that I had grown up my whole life hearing about and celebrating was in Santa Rosa, where I've been since I was 8 years old. And so I happened to come on while I was still in grad school. And it was as we were gearing up for the centennial for the women's suffrage movement for the 19th Amendment. And so I had the honor of working with particular materials such as this California Suffrage Centennial Gazette and many of the gazettes, the newspapers that we produced between, I was there between 2016 and 2020. As you know, the pandemic shifted a lot of things, including funding for my position at the National Women's History Alliance. And so I took a little hiatus from researching history and but have remained in support and contact with the organization, still on occasion writing copy, doing research, helping really however Molly needs help, um, supporting her. Some of the board members that we had during the centennial are Kim and Salter and Diana Madashi, and they celebrate. So that we were very into. It was a lot of fun, lots of celebration, lots of sashes and purple wearing. Here's Bob Cooney that we talked about previously, at a parade to celebrate the women's history, the suffrage movement. And some really exciting things that, unfortunately, I apologize, I don't have pictures for at this time, but some of the really great things that came out for the gear up to the centennial was um, getting a float in the parade in Pasadena for the Rose Parade, which is a feat in of itself. And again, it just the idea that they were able to be in the Rose Parade with their people dressed as suffragists is really phenomenal, because it brought women together from all over the country, and some prominent women in Pasadena who just persisted and persisted until that became a reality, and it gave a national attention to the centennial. And then just some little bit of materials that I helped to and projects that I got to work on myself while I was there. 2019 was the theme of Visionary Women Champions of Peace and Nonviolence, and using a local artist to create the logo of the dove. And then we had our honorees, and were able to celebrate them, the ones that were still living in DC that year. And again, 2019 is a really great year. This is one of the last projects, because all the projects I did for the centennial happened before 2020. This project just illustrates this year, as all years, the diversity of the people that they are celebrating, and from all over the nation. So, for example, Mary Burnett Talbert, one of the founders of the NWHP, and helped to lead efforts to put an end to lynching. And she was honored for that and her efforts to work for the civil rights movement. And then Sarah Brady, the leader in gun control, testified against the weakening of the Gun Control Act, and instrumental in passing the Brady-Bilhand Violence Prevention Act in 1993. And then that year, we also got to celebrate Deborah Tucker. She was a leader for over 45 years to end domestic violence and sexual violence. Helped pass the Violence Against Women Act of 1994, co-founded the National Domestic Violence Hotline, and was the president of the National Center on Domestic Sexual Violence. Sister Alice Zachman dedicated her life to ending war and genocide, so here's a picture of her. So she was honored that year for her work to end human rights violations. And then Zainab Salbi helps women in war-ravaged communities. At 23, she founded Women for Women's Women's at International, and has taught over 350,000 women through her healing and recovery programs. That's okay. I just want to make sure it was. It's okay. I thought that was me, Leslie.
Then came
okay.
the great
Dorothy Cotton devoted herself to civil rights and political empowerment for African Americans, director of legendary citizen education program. I think the great thing about Dorothy Cotton is many people, as many of us may not have known about a lot of these women, that education piece really aligned with the National Women's History Alliance, and helped to train people for organization and how to register to vote. And then Elsie Boulding.
Leasa,
yeah.
You don't have slides for the pictures that you're showing?
The vote and dramatic
that you're talking about right now? You ended on nevertheless, she persisted, and then we're going to go to a video.
Okay, I'm sorry.
So we're gonna,
I downloaded the wrong slides then. Okay, awesome. Thanks for
yeah,
letting me know.
yeah. I wondered what was going on there. But we're gonna go ahead and go to that video at this time.
Perfect.
And you should be able to see the video on your screen.
In the 1970s, women's history was not much more than a vague idea. Then came the great feminist marches in New York, Washington, D.C., and other cities, marking the 50th anniversary of women winning the vote, and dramatic actions like women burning their bras in Atlantic City during the Miss America pageants. There were also some scattered reports of women in labor reform, like Rosie the Riveter, and a splashy Time magazine cover. But even strong books from academia drew little notice. Only flashes, but certainly flint for what needed to happen. Women's history and a sustained awareness of the importance of women's contributions in all areas of American life, including schools, workplaces, and government offices.
Well, my conversion experience to women's history came when I was a young social studies teacher trying to survive in the classroom, my second year of teaching, knowing that teachers need to know everything, especially social studies teachers. And as a Friday, making my class particularly relevant on Friday, a young man raised his hand in the back of the classroom and said, "And what is the women's movement?" It's 1972. Ms. Magazine has been published. Shirley Chisholm's going to run for president. Barbara Jordan's actually going to be elected from the state of Texas, right? It's 1972. It's a banner year, the women's rights movement. And I am a social studies teacher. I look at this young man. I look at the class. I try and look as intelligent as any teacher could look. I pause and say, "What a good question." Let's divide into groups and look at that question. And so I went back to my classroom and I told those young people the truth. I said, what a question. What an important question. Because unless we ask these questions, how do we change the way we see the world and most importantly, ourselves, our mothers, our foremothers? And so the rest of the semester and for many semesters after that, every time we introduced a chapter in American history, we would say, how did this relate to women? Or how did this relate to people of different cultural groups? Because each time we asked those questions, we expanded ourselves. So I would really like to thank that student all these years later and all the students of the world who are brave enough to ask those questions.
In a 1978 history class in Santa Rosa, teacher Alice Wexler remembered, Molly McGregor took a routine class assignment, making a slideshow on the history of women in the USA, and brought these slideshows and presentations into classrooms. This was the beginning of what would transform into a brilliant 40-year grassroots project that educated and inspired thousands of girls and young women across the country and beyond. This energy and transformation started with a small group of women in Sonoma County, California, who felt the need to know about women's history themselves. This desire to know was the origin of the National Women's History Project, co-founded by Mary Ruthsdotter, Betty Morgan, Maria Cuevas, Paula Hammett, and Molly Murphy McGregor. Early on, they rolled out what would be a blueprint for a national program, a mission to build and sustain awareness of multicultural women's history. It began with a day, International Women's Day, March 8, 1978. With lobbying and backing from educators and women's groups, President Carter was persuaded to declare National Women's History Week in 1980. After further work by the project and its allies, March was recognized as National Women's History Month, which is celebrated nationally every year.
We are here to celebrate Women's History Month by honoring women who make history, to celebrate the lives of women whose heroism and achievements have helped build this country. And we are commemorating the leadership of a small group of women who had the idea that women's history was worth celebrating just 20 years ago and have, with their ideas, their inspiration, their hard work, and their infectious style of leadership, created a national movement. We are here to honor the National Women's History Project.
First contacting schools and educational task forces, the project presented teachers, both women and men, with a strong curriculum that brought awareness of women's rich heritage to both students and the teachers themselves. This new knowledge, said Molly on the declaration of the first Women's History Week, was a way to make all women more self-assured, more optimistic about the power we can have over our lives, to be makers of history and active participants in our society. She set the tone and overall purpose of their work, the realization that women were winners and leaders in so many areas of society. The National Women's History Project created not only curricula, but also posters and materials designed to go into everyday spaces, living rooms and classrooms, boardrooms and offices, barracks, meeting rooms, city halls, and even police and fire stations. Women's images started appearing as never before. The History Project fostered community events and also encouraged state and local representatives to proclaim March as Women's History Month. Public libraries and bookstores worked up displays of women's literature and highlighted the few books that existed on women's history. The project worked in collaboration with other groups like the Girl Scouts, Business and Professional Women, and the League of Women Voters to sponsor essay contests, new research, and events tied to women's history. During the first decades, the project distributed up to 300,000 catalogs annually and employed a staff of 7. State and federal agencies made grants for curricula that totaled over $500,000 as the work was so new and just being recognized. The project gained validity, and its vision, the need for broadcasting women's place in our nation, was recognized, and over the years a movement was created. Gradually, women, along with their history and achievements, started to seep into the mainstream of American life. The project turned unknown women trailblazers into household names. It led women to make Women's History Month a community event, and eventually turned scattered observances into a national celebration. After 38 years, the National Women's History Project became the National Women's History Alliance, reflecting the heightened interest and new organizations that have grown up to help Americans learn more about women's history. The project has gathered together, distributed, and often produced publications, books, gazettes, and films throughout its 41 years. It has led celebrations of the women's suffrage movement for over 25 years and is promoting Women's Equality Day as a national holiday. Each year, the Alliance chooses an inspiring theme for Women's History Month, which is used widely by federal, state, and local governments and groups of all sorts. Throughout the year, thousands call the Alliance's office for research and help and visit the website for resources and information. The National Women's History Alliance has named women honorees, both alive and deceased, every year, and many events have been held in Washington, D.C. This event, along with publications about these honorees, brings these women out of the shadows and quite deliberately writes them back into history.
We need Women's History Month so we can remember all of the strong, unbreakable, empowering,
disrupting women who play a vital role in history.
We need to acknowledge the women, the relentless pioneers who didn't back down in a room full of men and taught us
how to stand up for myself.
Oh, perseverance. We are capable of accomplishing absolutely anything.
how to fight back and how to not give up on the fight.
We've seen one of the grandest celebrations of all, the centennial of women winning the right to vote. Here again, the Alliance led planning efforts, supported special projects, networked extensively, and offered grassroots leadership to the many groups and individuals commemorating this historic anniversary. Starting in the 1970s, Molly and the National Women's History Alliance showed women and girls not only that they had a history far more diverse and complex than the textbooks taught, but also that they were a part of history. And most importantly, that they could make history. Come join us as we continue to discover and tell women's stories.
Excuse me while I take care of that. All right, Lisa, you're back. And we'll be back in just a second here as well. Um, Maybe while I bring up our final screen, you can tell us about this year's theme.
Well, let me double check because this year it's been more general. So they've kind of moved away. I'll get you the theme, but they've moved away from nominating women and really for people to celebrate and really encouraging people to celebrate locally, which has been a big shift since 2020. Hold on one second.
Getting a little interesting. So this year's theme being moving forward together, women educating and inspiring generations. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so it's just about the collective strength of influencing women who've dedicated their lives to either education, mentorship, or leadership. So the goals and objectives are to honor and recognize the achievements of women who've made these contributions, as always, to inspire, to motivate you to continue in the pursuit of education and leadership roles. And so again, this year there is not past years they would have nominated a list of women and celebrated them nationally, and they've kind of moved away from that model, and with the idea of moving forward together, that you at the local level can decide which women in your community and your lives have been impactful in education, mentorship, and leadership this year. So they're still providing a guiding theme without providing nationally nominated honorees as they have in the past.
That's great. Um, Having a little just hiccups around that share. Always happens when there's a video in the mix. Videos are great, but for some reason they just create a little bit of a hiccup. So we are moving on to our Q&A time here, and Leasa Graves, our former education director from the National Women's History Alliance, just concluded a presentation about National Women's History Month, its origins and importance. And as well, we got to see a 9-minute video. So if you saw all that screen sharing, you saw that video is actually available on YouTube. And I'll make mention at this time that this presentation will also be available on YouTube. The National Women's History Alliance video that we watched, it was a 9-minute video, is on the National Women's History Alliance YouTube channel. So that's a great channel to go and check out. And this presentation tonight will be uploaded onto the Historical Society of Santa Rosa's YouTube page. And you can have a quick link to their YouTube page by going to to Historical Society Santa Rosa.org, going to their website and going to the YouTube link. So with that Q&A, I know that earlier there was a question, Lisa, and it was kind of cleared up in the video, but I'm going to re-ask it because you had talked about a president calling Molly, and that's very exciting. Molly talk about that several times. And it sometimes is a bigger fishtail than I've ever heard before, but it's not a fishtail. It's a real deal. And she really draws everybody in. And you had mentioned it a little bit as well, that in 1979 or 80, that phone call happened. And someone asked, well, who was the president during that time? Can you talk a little bit more about that phone call?
Yeah, so my memory of also hearing the story, and it is pretty exciting, is that she's in the office and she gets told, how you get told back in the day, someone's on the phone for you, and it's President Carter. Someone's calling from the White House. The president wasn't on at the time, and And so she, has to kind of put it on hold for a second and gather herself, and then picks up the phone. And she always says it was the first and last time a president called her from the White House. So it was very exciting. And yeah, and it's definitely one of her highlights. And I think especially because for it to be passed, it actually required bipartisan support in Congress, and to have that with some conservative politicians at the time that were able to actually say, yes, I do support women's history. It would not have happened without bipartisan support. So I think that's another piece of the story she really appreciates.
Yeah, in fact, it was spearheaded by both a Democrat and a Republican.
Yes,
So
yes.
that was, yeah, very bipartisan. Want to make mention once again that if you'd like to ask a question and you're here on Zoom with us during the webinar, you can key in your question into the chat room, and then I'll facilitate that over to Leasa. Or if you're joining us live on our simultaneous broadcast on Facebook, you can actually just key in your question into the Facebook comments, and one of our board members from the Historical Society of Santa Rosa does take that. They'll take the questions from Facebook and then key them in here on Zoom so I can see those and get them answered for you. Have another question there on Zoom, on the Zoom chat. Before we get to that though, those of us that know and love Molly and the National Women's History Alliance and the National Women's History Project, we use those terms very interchangeably, and people get a little confused. Like, wait a second, you called it a project, wait, and then you called it an alliance. Can you? And they talked about that just briefly in that 9-minute video, but can you go back over why was it a project? And then why did it switch to National Women's History Alliance, which it's called now, but there is still demarcation everywhere that refers to the project. So can you clear that up for us?
Yeah, so originally started out as a project, right? The goal was to get women's history exposure and to get education. So it really was just a grassroots project. And I don't know that Molly and the founding members were prepared for how much positive reception they received. And so, it took off, started garnishing national attention just everywhere. Again, for all the naysayers, there were just so many more people that were excited about this shift and this moment, and so much to celebrate. And when I came around, that it was already in the works when I came in 2016, but it was this idea of being an alliance to start making, because by this point in 2016, there's lots of women's history, right? There's the women's history museums coming. There's a whole, it's no longer this one project, this one clearinghouse holding and housing all the materials. It's there are other organizations, and so they just felt like it no longer felt right to be a project. One, because they were bigger than that and reaching a greater place than this small Sonoma County project that started, but also because there now were so many other groups and organizations to collaborate with, that they really wanted to be the place that brings all of those organizations together. So instead of being a clearinghouse of materials, really being a center and that pulls in all of these groups to tackle whatever the area is, right? So during the centennial, we hosted and I organized 2 different educational conferences where we brought people from all over the United States to talk about how are we going to celebrate and help educate people about the upcoming centennial. And so that was really just the shifting kind of how they saw themselves of being the only group, and then now all of these wonderful, amazing organizations working together to continue the mission.
Yeah, yeah. So folks, when you hear the project and you hear the alliance, same thing, but a growth has occurred.
Yeah.
Continues to grow today. Yes. So I asked that because then the question that's in the chat is if there is any specific marker here or site in Santa Rosa that highlights the formation of the National Women's History Project. And if not, where would you, and do you know, maybe Molly has an idea where that would be located, or hopes and dreams,
Yeah. No, I would love to see a marker. There is not a marker. I will talk about a different marker that exists, I think, because of some of the efforts with the National Women's History Alliance. So I'll come back to that. But as far as the National Women's History Alliance, there isn't a marker. I think downtown somewhere, because there were so many marches and organization. Wouldn't it be great to have one on the square? The square needs a little life, a little excitement. So it would be wonderful to have that. And I know that Molly would she's a very humble person. She had a passion. She left teaching to do this, but she's never stopped being an educator. And so if I asked her, should we make you a memorial, she would just laugh and say how unnecessary that was. But she would agree that the efforts of the National Men's History Alliance should continue on, right? This is her legacy that she leaves us, and I know that she will want it to continue into far into the future. So there currently isn't one. However, there is a marker so I did my grad work on the suffrage movement in Sonoma County, and we were very instrumental in the winning the right to vote in California, and Sonoma County was. And so there is a marker in Sebastopol for the women's suffrage movement. And the reason I bring that up is because one of the efforts by the National Women's History Alliance under part of my efforts to lead this was to the Pomeroy markers that you see when you go to a location that highlight historic places. We're willing to donate a marker, one or a few markers to every state to document their suffrage efforts. And so Sebastopol was able to get one of those markers and I feel terrible right now, but if there's a hall in Sebastopol, I would have to remind myself, but there's a hall in Sebastopol that has one of those markers, and that came out of the efforts of the Sebastopol residents really making sure that was researched and documented and putting through that application. But part of a wider national effort by getting Pomeroy markers. And because of the pandemic, there were issues with the markers, some of the markers being completed. But at one point, we really did have almost every state have at least one location that they were qualifying for a Pomeroy marker.
And so that brings up a whole nother point as well, because we talk again, those of us that are a little bit in the know, we talk interchangeably about the centennial. And then you had slides up that had the California centennial, and then we saw a picture in the video from the 2020 Rose Day parade down in Los Angeles, in Pasadena. And that was the centennial. So, and then there's other centennials too, but we'll try to just stick with two for now. So differentiate those dates for us, like the California centennial. We saw that beautiful poster, lots of oranges and yellows, and there's like one woman with kind of almost like this halo around her, wearing robes, and then that 2020 centennial. So can you talk a little bit about that and those differences, get the historical significance of one leading into the other?
Yeah, so California was one of the earlier, got the 1911, they for October 10th, 1911, when it became the sixth state. So we were one of the earlier states to offer women's suffrage. And it was 9 years before the 19th Amendment. So the two anniversaries are the state of California granting I will say most women, as many of us in the audience would know, that did not include all women, but most, I can't even say most, many women were granted the right to vote in California. And then that helped lead efforts to the 19th Amendment being passed and ratified for the national passing of women's right to vote. So it's just same effort, same goal, just states' rights versus national suffrage rights.
Yeah, and I'm gonna pick your brain here. I'll put you on the spot just a tiny bit, but I think you'll live up to the challenge. So in that California suffrage vote occurred October 10th, 1911. There's some little history facts around which cities here in Sonoma County actually voted for women to have the vote, and then which cities didn't. And you can expand out to the Bay Area even. But it's great to remember that this obviously women didn't have the right to vote yet. So it was actually men that were voting at the polls about whether or not women in the state of California could then vote, right? And do you recall any of those cities that said that actually when you broke down the vote,
I don't have those cities memorized, but it is a fascinating thing to consider because the reason Sonoma County became so instrumental was because in previous attempts to get women the right to vote, our county and the northern part of California was actually against the vote for suffrage because it was this idea that we were against the temperance movement had really hampered women's suffrage, and people were fearful if we gave women the right to vote, we'd lose our alcohol. And and a lot of women had kind of given up on this vote, this idea of a vote. And it's really strange when you read, strange only in how it all unfolded, because when you read the letters and the correspondence, the 1906 earthquake happens, and these women with money and who would normally be volunteering at different places and doing their philanthropy were like, I don't really have anything to do. What if we work on the vote again? Like, it was just kind of that laissez-faire of like, we should really work on the vote again. And so when they did, they were very strategic. They had learned from the previous efforts, and they were very strategic, and they felt very confident they had to get Northern California on board. And so so they put everything in, and they went everywhere in the state. I don't think of there's a county in the state that was not visited by that didn't have suffragists. And then Sonoma County had visitors by national members and state members, because they really saw this as a battleground, that if we could get California and some of these bigger states, then we could flip the whole nation. So I apologize, I don't have all the states, but as are the counties. But it's so much the history of our county, right? That there's not we're not leaning one way or the other, and there was a lot of misinformation about what would happen if we gave the women the right to vote. And I just love, like, out of all, like, I love the suffrage movement, but California suffragists were pretty special, and they were just so innovative and creative, and they figured out some things. Like, one of the things they figured out was the Model T was a novelty. So they had a Model T, they had different cars at different campaign areas would have cars, because if they drove into a town, people were excited. And then they would put these beautiful women dressed in their suffrage outfits, they're white, and they would put them on a car, and then they would start to sing, and the crowds, and they would go to, even here, they went to the Native Sons celebration, and we still can't figure out exactly where they've been, but they were next to the knife throwing stand. I'll always remember that. So here's this big festival and celebration. They've put themselves in a place that really didn't want them. The Native Sons did not want them to attend, but they attended anyways, and they were right next to the knife throwing. So a good visual for you. And they just used these just grassroots techniques, and they would sing, and people would come around to hear the beautiful women. And they figured out instead of being angry at them and booing them and throwing things at them, they were so caught up in the beauty and the voice, and they were kind of calmed and lulled to hear their voice. And then often at that point oftentimes a man would speak, right? So the women have pulled them in, and then the men would speak to help the men that we were talking about. But again, not just men were against the vote. There were many women who did not believe that women should have the right to vote. So these strategies helped them, kind of similar, like there's a parallel, right, between them and the National Women's History Alliance and many women's grassroots movements, which is how do you connect to your community? And how do you convince people that you are deserving of the same equal rights? And so doing that through nonviolent means, although women often suffered violence at the hands of the state and authorities that did not want them to have the vote, but they persisted.
Yeah, definitely. And I do recall that it was those rural areas in California that really tipped the scales by just a hair, but just enough to where then in 1911 that vote passed. And in fact, so I might be wrong, but I think it was San Francisco actually voted against
Yeah,
The
yeah,
populace voted against women to have the vote, but it's so different than today, right? A large city had more at stake, the wine or not wine, but the
yeah,
alcohol
yeah,
industry, right?
yeah.
And so those big cities weren't the liberal beacons that they are now, right? So it's just so interesting. It's such a fun dive to get into. You also mentioned, Women's Equality Day, and I think there was something in there around, people saying, well, Women's History Project and the suffragists and whatnot, and you're not putting enough attention to Equality Day, and you don't have supplies or product or educational materials around it. So then Molly and the crew developed those materials. When is Women's Equality Day, and is that still true, or can you still find product on the website?
Yeah, so it's August 26th, and it's to commemorate the adoption of the 19th Amendment. So it's making it the push is that it's wanting to make it a national holiday. That's always been the goal of the alliance. That it's it's up there with President's Day. It has the same value as this shift in the and women's rights. So yeah, August 26th. There are and materials. They have old materials. They often have even a lot of the gazettes and things can or presentations can be found through their web store online. So if you're interested in like older themes related, and they go back, you can actually click on the website and you can put in the year that you're interested in and see digital copies of a lot of the materials for presentations, PowerPoints or gazettes that they had during that time. But yeah,
Yeah.
August 26th.
It's coming up. It's coming
Yeah.
up.
Yeah.
This one will be one for the history books, that's for sure. Let's see what happens here.
Yeah.
And we also have, we're in National Women's History Month currently. Tomorrow's a big day. There was a little blurb about Rosie's, and in the video presentation. So tomorrow being March 21st is Rosie the Riveter Day, proclaimed here in California, and Rosie's actually got the Congressional Gold Medal just a few years ago. So lots of great history right there. Any other special dates or information about Women's History Month to still occur, being that we're on the 20th right now?
I don't have any events coming up. I think it's good for everybody to always mark, even though it's already past March 8th is Women's International Day. That's often a day of demonstration as well. I know we had a great turnout in Santa Rosa this year. But yeah, I know, unfortunately, this came a little bit after. There was the National Women's History Alliance had a presentation yesterday that they were doing for their theme. But yeah, and their materials are up all year. And again, we hope that you think of March as the kickoff to Women's History Month, and that it reminds us to think and celebrate, and that it isn't, as they shift to the Alliance, this idea that we wouldn't just celebrate in March, that we'd be celebrating all accomplishments, where that's where you're seeing the Women's Equality Day, different centennials and celebrating those.
Yeah, yeah. And anything else that you'd like to add in about uh, what's coming up this year, either with the theme or with Molly? You talk about the new executive director at all,
Yeah,
and what's going on.
I would just visit at the National Women's History Alliance website and visit the store and get on the mailing list if you're not already on the mailing list, so you're getting up-to-date information. I think their Facebook page is a wealth of information as well, because they highlight women daily um, on their Facebook. And I think just staying in touch with them, because they send mailers and information and regular newsletters. So I think the best way to stay connected with them and see what's coming up is to go to the website and sign up for newsletters. I was trying to think newsletters, but emails and updates on what's happening.
Yeah, definitely. It's a great resource of all kinds of information, materials. Um,
And I
does
also
Molly
highly
still answer? Oh,
She
sorry. Go
still,
ahead.
yeah, no, that's okay. Molly still answers the phone.
Okay. All
I
right.
remember, it's funny. I always think about this because I remember when I was a teacher and I had found the Gazette and I called because I would like to order a Gazette, and the woman was very kind and she told me over the phone how, to go about that. And then a couple years later, I ended up working for Molly. And so I'm pretty sure Molly had picked up the phone at that time. So I always feel like we were destined to work together. But I was also going to recommend one of the board members that's still on the board and has been for a long time, Martha Wheelock. She's the one who produced that video that you saw today, Wild West Women, and her all of her videos through the Wild West Women also highlight women's history, and she has quite a few videos that are available to explore some of the specific areas that she's highlighted.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I do. Thank you for encouraging everybody to visit the website and maybe even give Molly a call.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be great if everybody just gave Molly a call instead of asking how to do something or how to get something? Just say thank you. Just so
Yeah.
show
Oh,
some
yeah.
appreciation. Wouldn't that just be
Yeah.
lovely?
Yeah, and she did, and I was my husband's birthday fall, so we were out of town when they had her retirement party this year, but I know that she was able to celebrate that on a quality day, and yeah, she would again be very humble and tell you, she was happy to do it. I don't think she thought she had any other choice, but as you know, Leslie, from working with her, her enthusiasm is contagious, and she just has this great spirit of like, we're just going to do it and we're going to make it work and we're going to pivot and when we need to pivot. And so I did ask her because I know people were asking, about now and this year, and she really encouraged everybody to just remember how important it is with your local efforts and to continue building community and connecting with people in your community. And that, she doesn't have a lot of fear right now. We didn't have the national endorsement to celebrate women's history, but that isn't going to stop the National Women's History Alliance, and it isn't going to stop anyone who believes in the importance and value of women's history. And so her message today really is just to continue to do what we're doing, to continue to spread it. And you know what I thought was kind of cool, that even without the endorsement, women's history still happened. And I think that that's an attribute to not just the work of the Alliance. Molly would insist it's also the people in Sonoma County and beyond that are just willing to be excited, to embrace, to celebrate and honor the women in their community. And I think that that's our charge in Sonoma County, right? We have a lot of, we have that mural downtown, and I think it's all men from Sonoma County, but there are so many amazing women in Sonoma County. And, even little things like different senators but even Nell Cotting, like what else did Nell Cotting do? What other groups did she support and organize that she hasn't gotten, acknowledgement for? So start asking those questions about the women in our county. What women are we missing, and what women can we lift up?
Yeah, and I think you're referencing the mural on the Press Democrat building.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually the old Press Democrat building.
Mm-hmm.
So they've moved around the corner, but it does have women on it. Just I want to give a shout out to like Gayla Barron and a few other women that are on there, but certainly can be more.
Mm-hmm.
And I love your idea of maybe, having a marker in downtown, and there's certainly other places too. Coddingtown Mall, that would be wonderful, wouldn't it? To celebrate the history of the cod of Nell Codding, or even at the county building, because you have the Commission on the Status of Women
Mm-hmm.
and the role that Molly played being a commissioner, and then having that kind of one of the first alliances to make that happen. And the county and many of our cities, I believe, if not all 9 in Sonoma County, a majority of the cities have already had their proclamation read and signed off by their mayors, and of course the county has as well. So it's going strong here in Sonoma County. It will. There's no canceling women's history. There's no way
Yeah.
that can
Yeah.
happen because it's there. It's not going to fade away. And just like this video is not going to fade away, it's going to be on YouTube, and folks can resource it on YouTube. About 24 hours from now, we'll have that uploaded. And that there's a bevy of videos from the Historical Society of Santa Rosa and the webinars dating back into October of 2022. So check out all of the videos. They get watched by people from all over the world, which is wonderful. And this will be the newest one that is on there. And be sure to also visit. If we go off screen here, folks, it's okay. I'm just going to share this slide real quick. Oh, maybe I'll share the slide. Here we go. Um, we we'll go right through this. Once again, the power of technology, sometimes great, sometimes has hiccups. But a quick view of all of these as we get to that last slide. Just for that website, because the Historical Society of Santa Rosa puts on these webinars for free, and it is a great reminder to go to the Historical Society santarosa.org, go to their website and make a donation, become a member, sign up for the newsletter, resource that YouTube page, resource their Facebook page, and enjoy everything that the Historical Society of Santa Rosa and their team of volunteers and board members have to offer with information and more. So thanks again to the Historical Society of Santa Rosa for putting on these webinars. And that website, once again, historicalsocietysantarosa.org. And thank you once again to Leasa Graves for presenting this evening, for always being a great stand-in for Molly. And we love to see her in person around Sonoma County and elsewhere, and we look forward to seeing her again, even in her retirement. But please do send all of our thanks and all of our appreciation for all of her hard work, over 40 years strong. And thank you for supporting her and presenting tonight.
Yeah, thank you for giving a showcase. It's I'm always, there's so many people who still don't know about the National Women's History Alliance, and I also put my email in the chat if anyone was interested in connecting with me specifically. And just thank you, Leslie. You've been a champion of the Alliance for many years, and we appreciate you including us.
Yeah. Wanted to also give some information. Ellen Bowen says that as the president of the Saturday Afternoon Club, she would love to have a launch of a campaign to get the history marker in Courthouse Square, or elsewhere, maybe too. Courthouse Square, just so you know, is getting a little bit full of all kinds of things. Being that I was on public arts committee that helped to bring Unum down to Courthouse Square, and there's more planned. And Unum was built by a woman, so that's a female artist. And then you also have the Asawa fountain, that is another prolific artist, female artist in her time. But anyway, and so please go to Saturday Afternoon Club website. I know you know that well, or give her a call. And don't worry, all of this information will be given to Leasa as well after the event. And thank you, Denise, our president of the Historical Society of Santa Rosa, for reminding everybody about the email address, info@historicalsociety.org, that website, historicalsocietysantarosa.org, and like I said, get all of those links available. So with that, I think we are just about done with all of the information. We're not done celebrating women's history. Not only the month, continue that throughout the month of March, but continue to celebrate, uplift, and acknowledge women's history all year long, your whole entire life. It is so important. And remember all of the women. Remember women that are traditionally marginalized, our indigenous historical ancestors as well. Molly and crew certainly did. They did a wonderful job being representatives of the great diversity of women's history. And let's all continue to do that as we move forward. So moving forward together, what a great theme. All
Yes.
right. All
Thank
right. Well, thank
you.
you, everybody. We appreciate you all being here, and look at the Historical Society of Santa Rosa's website for more information about ongoing webinars or in-person events as they are scheduled. We're going to sign off for now. My name's Leasa Graves, and this was Leasa Graves. We'll be seeing each other again soon, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Everybody have a great evening. Stay safe out there. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.